Morning. Good morning. The Finance Committee meeting, it's starting at 10:35. All members are present, that being Alderwoman Finlayson and Alderwoman O'Neill. At this time, I will accept a motion to approve the agenda for March 1st.
Madam Chair, I'll move approval of the agenda as written.
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. At this time, I'll accept a motion to approve the meeting minutes from the last meeting, February 15th.
Madam Chair, I'll move approval of the minutes for the February 15th meeting.
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. All righty, so we are going to get right to legislation review. And the first I have is 02-23, which is a budget target dates and financial impact of labor negotiations.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
At our last meeting, we moved to delay this until it had gone through committee or through public hearing, and it's done that this past Monday. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes. Yeah. So it's okay to be on our schedule.
Okay.
I'm the sponsor, so I guess I could start on that. Let me just get my notes. When I was appointed finance chair, it's kind of like what I'm used to doing when, I used to build buildings and I'd go right to the specs and say, okay, how am I supposed to build this or estimate it? So I sort of followed the same process when I became finance chair and I took out the code. This is before I really even, got into it, but I saw that there were things that were not what I had seen done in just watching the city council meetings and all that. And I sat down at the time with the city manager and the finance director, and, I asked questions, and I just made a note to myself that eventually I would have to update this as far as the substance of the budget. So I waited until the first budget cycle, and the other thing that came up during last year's budget cycle was a little bit of confusion in the collective bargaining. There was language in 3.32 that conflicted with what was sort of inferred in the budget code. So there was also a date that said when the collective bargaining agreement was due, and then it extended through the budget cycle. So you could say that it was late, and it brings up this question of where is it, et cetera, et cetera. And I met with we had a Zoom meeting with Alderman Arnett and the city manager just to discuss how we could address that. And there's different extremes. There's like, if you have a date and you want it to be met, then there's consequences if it's not to be met. And because of our relationships with the unions, we didn't want to go that route. So what we did is we basically covered all situations. Sometimes collective bargaining is already like 3 years old or something, and sometimes it's ongoing. So So how do you address that in the code? Well, the way to address that in the code is kind of what we did last year, where the negotiations were still going on, and we put the best financial impact that we knew at the time in the budget. And that's what this code says. No matter where the negotiations are, whether they're, they were done 4 years ago or 2 years ago, or if they're in the process of being renewed, the mayor's budget should include the financial impact. I see that, wow, thank you for Assistant City Attorney Carrie Berger here. If we want to talk about that chunk of this bill, well, actually, the bill, let me just explain. The bill is just two chunks. One of them is to address the collective bargaining timeline, if you will. And then the second chunk is just to align basically the paragraph, there's a paragraph in the budget code, let me just, that was from like 2010, 2014, and it was one paragraph that said what the budget should be. So Jody and I sat down and made it more of an itemized list, and you'll see that in the bill, correcting it where, there's a sentence here that I don't think any of us would know what it meant. And the fund groups have been revised, so we revised Code Section 6.16 to address the funds that we now have. So that's pretty much it. It's and then to go back to 3.32, with the assistance of Assistant City Attorney Berger, there were definitions that were clearly missing. So it was an opportunity to include these definitions that you see in the first part of the bill. So is there anything you want to add, Ms. Berger, at this time, or are you just here for if there's any questions? Okay. So with that, if there's any questions, oh, and hi. Our Human Resource Director is here as well, because she was involved in the initial discussion about how to address collective bargaining, so it's applicable, for every budget cycle and the different situations.
I don't have any questions.
Well, I'll ask questions if that's what you're asking.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I
she
said I
didn't
didn't have any questions.
Oh, okay. I guess my first question is for Ms. Hopkins, if you could come. Being very familiar with our collective bargaining process, my question was, does this change the way we conduct our negotiations at all?
Not the way we would conduct our negotiations. It's really what I see you trying to accomplish here is the points at which there's communication. So you're asking for communication with the Finance Committee while we're in process of negotiation. And so that piece is different on some level. Clearly, during the budget process, even though you're attempting to put it here in the language of the code, my experience has been the administration has always made sure they put the money in the budget so there's adequate funding for what we're in the course of negotiating over. And first of all, may I first say, I sincerely appreciate that you heard the discussion around where you were going initially.
Oh, yeah.
I greatly appreciate that.
I had to address it because we had to address it. I mean, you've heard that. Where is it? And
yes, I just appreciate that you heard that, because what we tried to impart was that when you're in the process of negotiation, good faith bargaining means both parties are still coming to the table and still actively engaged. As you well know, Alderman Finlayson, from your past experience, both with the city and prior to, that it's really important that you keep that line of communication and go to the table and go to the table and go to the table with the right kind of approach and commitment to that process. You can't always control the timeline, but, we still have a responsibility to be good stewards of the city's finances in that process. My only question back to you, if that's okay, is if the communication back to the Finance Committee could be done in a closed session, because it's really important that we're not violating the exchange of information that we're going through when we're in process, because that may invite some scrutiny, public comment, interfere. I mean, you can't assume there won't be influence trying to be exerted. And it really, again, when I think of good faith bargaining, it's that you respect the exchange of information and the relationship you're trying to build so you get to a yes. That is kind of a craft all on its own to carry out, but I think it's also important that you heard us around the alternate ways of settling dispute, maybe like out of your hands, out of our hands, in some of the processes that are available, meaning that it's a further commitment of city finances to accomplish that means to an end, and may not end up providing you money to work with later because its ability to pay in a lot of those scenarios. So again, I just want to offer that a good way to do this is to make sure that's closed session, confidential, no communication about what the briefing is about, so that we can accomplish a good faith process with our bargaining team, which is made up of a union and management relationship.
Thank you for raising that, because I have stressed with my colleagues that even though it says that we will get an update, it doesn't mean we're going to get all of the nuances that are at the table. That's not how bargaining works.
No.
And so we may be a bit disappointed because the reports or the updates that we get are very generic, lacking the specificity that some of my colleagues want to hear and have an impact on.
Yeah.
And I don't want us to be in the position, as you just mentioned, of being accused of unfair labor practices. Mm-hmm. Everything on the bargaining table is a tentative agreement until it's not. And it's not at the end of the process. So we empower our bargaining team to negotiate for us from the beginning. And we entrust them to follow the process until they can bring us a negotiated agreement.
Right.
And that's how it works. Whether we like it or not, that's how it works.
Yeah, and it's not without interest in what the legislative body would like to see, because when the council held their meeting and said what were your priorities, what we heard also was that public safety was a priority. And so we take that kind of information to the bargaining table as well when we sit down, and obviously use good data, make sure that the information that we're pulling together, because there's an expectation on the side, on the labor side, that they know the city's financials, so they know what they have to work with and have some basis to push for their agenda. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean, that's just a practical way. You're going to come forward and represent your union members to the best of your ability in that exchange. But we do work very carefully with trying to present good information, good data, timely data, and sometimes the calendar gets very affected by what's available when. And, again, just speaking to your past experience, Alderman Finlayson, you know that you want to know you're not hiding something, that
That's right.
management doesn't have something more that's not being revealed. And even though we try very hard to be, my experience here is that we start from a good basis of information, and we don't have anything that we're withholding, and we're just really working out what are the economic and non-economic elements of a collective bargaining process. Who
And I
wants
think
what?
there's a responsibility for us at the beginning of the process to give you what goals we want to accomplish at the bargaining table. As you mentioned, public safety was a priority in the last negotiated agreement. So that's something that we need to share with you as our representatives at the bargaining table. So, we have to be held accountable so that in September and October, and Mr. Malinoff, you're going to have to corral us to do that, because we can't come back after the fact and say, oh, well, we should be doing this. Our input comes at the very beginning when we set the parameters or the goals for what we want to accomplish with all 4 of the unions.
Yeah, and we also want to respectfully have this in the right arena, and thank you for your statements before that, because we want to make sure that they're not bargaining with the council.
Exactly.
They're bargaining with the
Exactly.
management team that represents the city. Our information is only from, what do you consider priorities? What from your seat are you seeing are concerns? And then that may pan out, may not pan out in the data, in the information gathered. But at least it's something that we have and we can consider as we're going through what management's perspective is going to be.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm just going to, sorry, if I may, the reason for that language on the update is, and I didn't say this earlier, is that the present code says that to have the results of any agreement considered by the city council, that agreement must conform to the city's fiscal year or years and be submitted to the mayor by the 3rd Monday of March. So that's the finite language, or the absolute, that we deleted, basically,
Okay.
because every year is different. So that 3rd Monday of March, we're still in negotiations, blah, blah, blah. So the compromise was, at the finance committee meeting, the city manager would give us an update, but the intent there was not, and it's a legal question, I assume touching that would probably have to be in closed session because you don't want it to morph to anything else, but the objective of that was just a update on progress. Where are we? It's like a one statement coming from the city manager. Where are we in the progress? Are we 60% there? Are we 70% there? Now, the legal question is, does that require a closed session?
So I just want to point out that the legislation actually does require to go into closed session.
Oh, where?
If you look at,
I just had it bubbled.
2B.
yeah,
B,
3.32060, B, 2B.
Oh, it is there. Thank you. Yeah, I knew that all along. Yeah, Okay, thank you.
So
All right.
it's kind of 2 things, though.
Sorry, I
Closed
got thrown
session,
by
but
what-
then maintaining the confidentiality around what's shared in closed session. That's not to say that's not a given.
Yeah.
It's just a reminder that the purpose of closed session is not just to prevent the public from having access to that through an open meeting, but that when we're in collective bargaining, we are committed to respect that, both parties to respect that as you're going through the process, so that we are honoring a good faith bargaining process.
Thank you.
And something else I'd like to add is that we do informational sessions with our bargaining members, and I believe in the past, a number of times, we've invited the council to those sessions as well. So we have our actuary present on the status of our pension plan, the police and fire pension plan, not the state retirement plan, but our own pension plan, and our benefits, our Insurance Solutions, who's our broker for our benefit plans, does a kind of a state of the financial standing of our benefit offerings. So those are also economic elements of bargaining. And, that is not presenting in closed session in this format per se. But I'll ask Carrie, maybe that also can be counted as a presentation in closed session. And the question back to you is, do you want that to be only the finance committee that gets invited to that, or is that any member of council that would like to appear?
I think it might be beneficial to everyone to hear from the actuary as well as the benefits manager. And early on, so that we know you will know what you're dealing with at the bargaining table, but we also have an idea of what is expected, I'll just say. So I think that would be helpful to everyone.
Yeah.
I suspect several of our colleagues have not had an actuary's presentation like you're talking about, but that is part of the bargaining process when all of the information is presented. And I have to hearken back to when we did interest-based bargaining. It took us 13 months, but we came out with a 4-year agreement that was awesome. And how many times did we have the actuary come during those 13 months to talk about how we could make changes to make it all work?
Well, and that was the point at which the DROP program was
That's right.
adopted for police and fire. So that, of course, that was a larger element of the benefit.
I saw Ms. Dickinson raise her hand, and Ms.
I was just going to point out what Ms. Berger said about it being required to be a closed session.
Thank you. And Ms. Berger, you had your hand up too at one point.
That's what I was going to point out.
See, I believe
Okay.
Trish.
I did have a question about, oh man, now I've lost it. About the definition of good faith. And the second part of that, and it's just a question, I don't disagree with it, means that each party shall keep the other informed on all matters within the scope of the representation and give reasonable written notice of any action to be taken. What's the any action to be taken? I'm not clear on what that means.
So that language is actually currently in the code. What Cynthia has been doing is sort of breaking down the bigger paragraphs, if you will, in the code and making it sort of more readable. And so good faith was defined in a separate section of the code, and it just was relocating it to the definition section. And so that part hasn't changed for substance, it's just sort of changed by location. But to answer your question, the reasonable notice of any action to be taken, and Tricia and Jody and the city manager can sort of chime in too, but, if you're going to make a change to the collective bargaining agreement, it's going to be through a side letter. So it's going to be a written agreement that memorializes the agreement that took place or that is going to take place and sort of change the currently existing memorandum of agreement. And it's just basically, the way that I interpret it is it's memorialization of the negotiation process.
Okay. So that does come after, I don't want to say at the end, but after a certain portion has been, that's no longer a tentative agreement.
Well, tentative agreements could also be in written form. So I think that's part of the good faith bargaining process is you reach that tentative agreement and then ultimately there's the finalized agreement after the ratification.
Yeah. Stylistically, what we attempt to do is we're going through the collective bargaining process. If we've, there's what you want, what we want, and as you come to a place where you're not going to hold things back because you want two things before you're going to agree to the one thing. If you do come to a meeting of the minds, we put that in writing. We identify the section, the parties can sign off, and it's set aside, or it's identified by the presiding attorney as such and communicated electronically, so it's memorialized as a tentative agreement on a particular item or series of items.
But does that mean that it's final? Could that tentative agreement be withdrawn because you're still bargaining? I mean, that's the nature of what you do.
It's
So it
possible.
could change.
It
Okay.
tends to show, again, in good faith bargaining, it's that, I accept that, you accept that.
Mm-hmm.
And then let's move that over here and let's come back down to what's remaining.
Mm-hmm.
So I haven't seen that happen. I mean, tentative agreements tend to
Mm-hmm.
hold water, during the process because, you've agreed to it. So
Mm-hmm.
let's not undo something that's already there. But clearly, until you've got good financial information, we start in November, we're going to be looking at putting non-economics forward first, in order, generally, nobody's going to agree to something on the economic level, so they really know what you have to work with.
Okay, and this doesn't change, and thank you both for that. This doesn't change our process. The mayor presents the State of the City address in April, and his budget then becomes the council's budget at that time. And hopefully, originally, we used to have language that said that bargaining should be finished in January, and that didn't work. And we changed it to February, and the mayor's State of the City was in March.
Yeah.
And that didn't work, so we bumped it back to April, so, it's very fluid.
Well, and as you already pointed out, during the IBB process, it was October.
Yeah,
So in my experience and also talking to colleagues in other jurisdictions, it's over when it's over, and if what you want is an agreement. And if you don't make your fiscal year goal, you keep at it.
Right.
And then you may have retroactive impact, you may not. You may only have non-economics to deal with until you get to your resolution, and then, it's a future point. Maybe it's a January COLA, or, there are so many different scenarios out there. It just would be difficult to try and capture them all.
and it is different when you're negotiating a multi-year agreement. So if it's a one-year agreement, you have certain parameters, but if it's 4-year agreement, like the year we did IBB,
Yeah.
it took us 13 months, but we had a 4-year agreement when it was all said and done.
Well, and then you also have unforeseen circumstances like COVID years. So, I mean, you just can't control the variables in a finite way. So it's healthier, I think, to have parameters and do your best to have circumstances under which there's some expectation, but not be so rigid that you can't do what's best for the city with however long it takes.
That says it all. Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you, Trish, thank you. So, the best thing in all the situations you brought up is to stay silent on a due date, but know that the financial impact at that time will be in the mayor's budget. Any other questions?
Madam Chair, are you looking for a motion to give a favorable recommendation to 0223?
I would love that.
You'd love for me to do it also, wouldn't you?
I would. We've made many attempts.
I
to
will
sit down
give
on
you
this.
a favorable recommendation on 0223.
And I'll second it.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 All righty.
Thank you.
You don't lose sight of their responsibility, their role and responsibility. Well, because they have a different focus. And that's all they should be privy to. We created them to give us advice on areas that we're not well versed in. You just heard that we are well versed in bargaining. And many of them are fiscally conservative, period, which means they're not going to agree to our bargaining process. They think we should have no bargaining, or we should have defined benefit and not a defined contribution. Oh, no, that's just the opposite of what I wanted to say. Defined contribution as opposed to a defined benefit. So we just have to put it in perspective. And if it wasn't at an early hour of the morning, I would go to their meeting, but,
Okay, we were just gossiping. Next on the agenda is the resolution to waive the fees for the Wilma Lee. When is that coming? Oh,
March
Maryland Day.
31st.
Yeah, that's Maryland Day. Wow, the spring is in the works. Do I have any questions before I look for a motion?
I don't have a question. I'll make a motion that we give a favorable recommendation for R423.
I'll second.
And all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Okay, the Wilma Lee it is. Okay, R11-23. That's me. As you know, from the special events legislation that was passed, I don't know, several years ago, there's a requirement to list the city-supported special events that are upcoming that are in the next upcoming fiscal year. Cynthia did a great job of consolidating them all. If you look on page 2, there is the list, and the most important language here is that now therefore be it resolved by the Annapolis City Council that the following special events are designated city-sponsored special events during fiscal year 2024 in recognition of their significance to our heritage and public service to our city. There is a requirement on fee waivers in the code, and these, I think we all collectively agree that they meet that. As you can see, Juneteenth was added, and the holiday market is a new one.
Madam Chair, I think there's several new ones.
Yeah.
There's the Elks Parade, there's the Hooli and Shamrock the Dock. Could we have it highlighted, what's new in this list? Because there's no telling, it looks like they've all been,
Yeah, I mean, before they get on this list, we have done a respective resolution to approve the fee waiver. But you're right, I don't know. I mean, Felicia would know which ones were last year. I don't know, I think the
you can
Elks
look at the
Parade.
old list and see which ones are on it and which ones are not.
Cynthia, do you have, do you have my red
I
line
think
copy?
she's-
Yes, everything on that list are things that were passed for the current fiscal year or the current calendar year. The Hooli, the Shamrock, those were added to this year's events. So this is a continuation of those events that have already been added to the schedule.
So these are all events. The Hooli is the only one added from this year.
Shamrock, the dock was one day, and then it was with the Hooli, it was the second day was added
Right,
when you passed the Hooli resolution.
right. He added another event within an event.
I'm still not clear. If we've already approved all of these, why are we getting this?
This is for going forward for the
24.
next.
Okay, so this is 2024.
Yeah.
So the diaspora and the festival for MLK is something we've already approved?
Yes.
Okay,
I have a question.
okay.
But all these were all in separate, there was a grouping
Yeah.
of them, and then other ones were in separate resolutions. This year, they're all together.
Okay, but we do have resolutions approving all of these.
Yes,
Yes.
yes,
Okay,
yes.
thank you.
I have a question.
Go ahead. Yes, Alderman O'Neill.
So underline On the first page under line 24, the whereas, it talks about define a city-supported events, a special event for which the city shall not be the applicant or the event organizer. Aren't we the event organizer on the Independence Day Parade? As well as the Annapolis Holiday Market?
Can you pull up the fiscal impact note? I'm not able to see it.
DAP, I think DAP does the, Downtown Apples Partnership does the
Holiday Market?
holiday market.
Aren't we the, does anybody know? I thought we were the organizer for the Independence Day Parade.
I'm not hearing your question.
So it says that we're not the the city is not the applicant on page 1, line 29. It says shall not be the applicant or the event organizer of any of these city-sponsored events. The city is not the applicant or the event organizer. And I'm asking, I thought the city was the event organizer on the Independence Day Parade. I also thought it was the holiday market, but I've been corrected on that one. And the New Year's Eve celebration.
Cynthia, what I'm desperately trying to do is pull up the resolution for the, for the parade to see if it's addressed there on who
There are
organizes.
several on here that we are the sponsors of. Independence Day Parade,
Yeah,
We're the organizers of.
or the organizers.
yeah, the language.
That's just my question. Are we the applicant or the event organizer on these? Because that would
That would
make
not,
line 29 not applicable,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, since Felicia gets the applications,
But if we're the sponsor, who does the application?
I'm just asking for clarification.
yeah, it depends on
Yeah.
what it is, yeah. I can text her and she'll write back immediately, but I don't know if that's appropriate.
I don't know if she's available to come over here as well. I don't know
Felicia, is
what her
she-
schedule is today, but she would be the appropriate person to answer the
Yeah,
question.
yeah, she's coming for an OEM at 1:30, so
11:30.
11:30.
Well,
Okay.
may I ask the question, does it matter that we are the sponsor? I mean, is it applicable if it's our event that we don't have to list ourselves as sponsors?
I'm Cynthia Reuter, legislative and policy analyst for the city of Annapolis. I'm looking at last year's resolution that is the same as this one, and it included the Independence Day Parade, the New Year's Eve celebration. The section, so basically this is a resolution that was drafted previously and it's just been reused. The section that it refers to is just, the whereas just refers back to a section in the code so that basically things that are not supported by the city or sponsored by the city, it makes them events that are not city-sponsored. That resolution, that portion of the ordinance allows the city to have a part sponsorship of it and therefore waive the fees. I think that's what it applies to. All right.
All right. So my question just is, this one line, number 3, says, shall not be the applicant or the event organizer. So if the city is sponsor or co-sponsor, I'm just asking, are we the applicant or the event organizer on any of these, which would make line 3 I thought that we were the event organizer on the Independence Day Parade.
What I can tell you is I have had no involvement in special events since I started here in the last decade, so I can't give you an answer. But I'm reaching out to Ashley Leonard in my office. She is here today. I know she's worked on special events. And when there was a legislative change to city-sponsored versus city-organized special
Yeah,
events,
that's where it was.
7 or so years ago, maybe, she was involved in that. So I'm going to see if she can come up and maybe explain, give some
Yeah.
context to previous legislation that's been drafted, why it's been drafted that way, and whether or not it poses an issue, or at least gives you an answer to your question.
Thank you.
Yeah, and because it isn't in the last year's resolution, so it was something that was done in the revision of the special events this past year.
Put in this year?
The-
Is
It-
it for a reason?
That's why we're asking Ashley why that sentence is in there about, now I'm in the old one.
Shall not be the applicant or the event organizer.
Yeah, it's in the whereas, and last time,
And I guess my question revolves around you, if we are the applicant or the event organizer, does that somehow open us up to liability? And/or should we work on changing the language in the whereas section 14.18.020, line 3?
Ashley's on her way up.
good,
Thank you.
yeah, because it's ironic because, Karma, I think that was the objective of this revision on this language on city spot. We used to call it city,
It was like city hosted, and then it was city sponsored,
Yeah.
city organized.
yeah, so the objective was to change that language to minimize liability.
Right, it
But
was-
I think what you're also asking is there's a conflict, because if we are, then it shouldn't be on.
It was changed in this year's resolution so that it conformed to the actual ordinance. The language kept going back and forth in the old resolution. But what you could do, this isn't imminently required. You could set it aside to the next meeting and we can get it all straightened out if you, in between, if you'd rather.
Oh, okay. So we're really looking at that whereas clause. So if Ashley's on her way up, we could just, what's next on? the-
Madam Chair, we have a meeting at 11:30 in
Yeah.
here.
OEM, yeah.
Here's Ms. Leonard.
Here's Miss Leonard. Could you step up to the mic? Just to catch you up, I don't know if you've seen this resolution, but we did the annual resolution that approves all of the city-supported events for the upcoming year. And then Karma had a question where we have in the whereas clause that we define a city-supported event as a special event for which a city, waives some or all of the fees, agrees to provide financial or in-kind support, and number 3, shall not be the applicant or an event organizer. And I don't know if 3 is applicable or true, or maybe is that in?
For all of the, I was questioning Independence Day parades, and I guess there was another one that's no longer under that. And then the New Year's Eve celebration. And I guess the Memorial Day parade. I don't know who sponsored it.
So is
That
that,
might be one of ours, too.
is that requirement in line with our latest revision of the special events code? I think it's just
Well, I
throwing
think
us
the
off.
question is, can we be the sponsor and the organizer of our own event?
No, the way the code was rewritten, it's either one or the other. So it's either a city event or it's city sponsored. So you might be correct, although Felicia would know better of the funding on it, but if it's fully ours, then we don't really need to waive the fees because
Right.
there are things, which might be Independence Day and it might be
Right.
New Year's. Although I know the problem with some of that is I know that there's multiple things going on those days. So I don't know if all of them are ours or some. So that might need to be a question to clarify to Felicia. But yes, in theory, we would take off any ones that are truly city special events because then we don't need to waive the fees. We're already organizing, applying, and in theory paying for all of it. Which I know we do for the fireworks, for both New Year's Eve, Independence Day, and I think we might also pay for the fireworks for Juneteenth, to be honest with you. Or maybe we just organize it for them and then they
We do.
reimburse us.
Yeah.
So my question is very specifically to, on page 1 of the resolution,
Yeah.
line 29, this shall not be the applicant or the event organizer. And if we are the event organizer on something such as Independence Day Parade, then we are not adhering to our own resolution.
Right, those would need to be removed from the resolution, and they wouldn't need a resolution because in theory, they're already budgeted for. So in the past, part of the confusion is, in the past, there was an city-sponsored event was sort of this ambiguous term that included both city events where we were like the applicant and also events where we were just sponsoring. And the latest legislation broke those two apart. But it probably didn't, when we were doing these sort of our resolution templates, we probably didn't pull off the ones that don't actually need you guys to review them.
So, Madam Chair, I would recommend we postpone action so that we have an opportunity to pull out those which are city
Yeah, city
events.
events. Mhm.
And then also to give the finance director an opportunity to redo the fiscal impact note, because right now it's like 15,000 or something. And so we wouldn't charge ourselves for our own, we wouldn't waive our own fees.
Right, that would be, but I would assume, I would defer to the
Yeah.
director, but I would assume they would be budgeted in a different manner.
I think,
I'll second postpone.
oh, yeah, all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 And I will let Ms. Nolan know, and we'll work with Cynthia on
you.
that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Felicia, what the intent is, because of the special events legislation, is notification. So, you know, it was a notification, these are all of the events, so nothing is a surprise. But you can't put them on the same list if they're
Right,
meeting.
correct, just
supposed
because
to
we
meet that requirement.
recently
So,
made that change, yeah, correct.
Director Dickinson?
We may find that the fiscal note already includes the items it needs to include, because the Independence Day Parade is not on our
Right.
fiscal impact schedule.
I see that on the,
So there its absence would tell you there's no waiver of fees related to it. So,
Okay.
so that's.
so it may be that the fiscal note does not have to be reissued, but we'll see after we pull the other events off.
All righty, okay.
Thank you.
So in other words, you got the fiscal impact note right, we just didn't get the,
Yeah, because every event is not listed on the fiscal impact note, so there's probably a reason for that.
Okay,
thank
all
you.
right.
Thank
I
you.
couldn't see the fiscal impact note.
I'm sorry. it's
No, I
such
know, it was a
nitpicky
frustrating
question.
thing. So next on the agenda, which I have lost.
Is, here.
Yeah, we did.
Oh, the update. Oh, yes, you have some good news to share, Director Dickinson. Isn't this like the first year
Thank you, Ashley.
that you've met go ahead. The ACFR.
The ACFR is issued, I would say the earliest the ACFR has been issued since I started was January, the end of January, but that was the first year I was here. Then we had COVID, and after that, everything got very delayed. We were done in mid-February, and we have released the report to you yesterday when all the reports were consolidated. We have the ACFR, the single audit, the letter for governance, the letter to governance, and the management letter. The internal control letter, which is usually, we have seen it issued separately, is embedded within the single audit report. So I'll call that to your attention. And at the next audit committee meeting, we'll be reviewing it in detail with the auditors.
Okay,
So encourage everybody to
that's
be at
good.
that meeting or listen in, and
That's good to know.
other than that, just the budget, the major thing we've got going on in the finance department is getting the budget pulled together for presentation in April.
Okay.
Thank you.
All righty, well, we have to get going here, so
Madam Chair, I'll move to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Oh my goodness.